welcome to another Monday here on Adventures with Sarah. And today, as usual, we have a coffee chat coming at you. Our Where in the World program continues, and I hope you guys have been enjoying it. I have been enjoying it for sure. This week, Reed Cohen, good morning, Reed, is our host. Because we're going to cover a topic I don't really know much about. And so we're going to be covering Southern Africa this week. And I'm excited to learn because it's not a place that I'm very familiar with. But I do hope someday, hopefully maybe in the next couple of years, that I will also be offering a tour down there because I think it sounds like a fantastic destination. It's been on my travel dream list. So, and you actually have a tour that you're going to be doing there. Is it this year or next year?
Well, we're scheduled for September, but there's all those COVID things up in the air, and as we're going to learn from Todd, things are not going super well in South Africa. So we're still on a wait and see thing, but we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we can still go in September.
All right, so that's definitely going to be on the Adventures of Sarah calendar, but you can also talk to Reed if you want to go sooner rather than later. So I'm going to be floating around a little bit this week. I'm going to help Todd out with cooking tomorrow. He's going to teach us how to cook a Southern African specialty, and he's going to be my teacher tomorrow. I'm going to be in the kitchen, and he's going to show me how to do it. But then the rest of the week, you're going to see Reed. He's going to be hosting virtual tours and slideshow and all of that kind of stuff, and give me a little breather to catch my breath because it's been a busy week. As you guys know, there's been a lot of programming. So go ahead, Reed and Todd, take it away. I'm going to vanish into the background and have a great conversation. I'm going to listen.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, Sarah, and welcome everybody to Coffee Chat here. Our guest this morning is Todd Mentz in South Africa. Good morning for me, good evening for you, Todd.
Yeah, good morning, Reed. Nice to see you again with the beautiful Victoria Falls behind you. Wow, very nice.
Yeah, that's something I usually need to identify. This is Victoria Falls behind my head here. I thought that was a nice image for Southern Africa. Before we launch off here, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. Sarah talked about the schedule. On Wednesday, I'll be hosting Anne from Rwanda on our coffee chat. She's our point person for when we take people to see the mountain gorillas in Uganda and Rwanda. So we'll have Anne on Wednesday. Thursday, it's going to be nice and early in the morning for us here in the United States. Todd's going to give us that virtual tour of, is it Constitution Hill?
Yeah, it's Constitutional Hill and also the old jail. So the equivalent of sort of Robben Island that was in Johannesburg.
Right. Okay. So we're going to have a virtual tour. And in order for that to happen in daylight and when the institutions are open.
Oops.
Reed has some funny internet. That's why I'm sticking by here.
We're going to have an early-ish time for.
Reed, are you there?
I am.
Okay, sorry. We lost you for a couple minutes. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I must have been saying something terribly important. We'll just move on from there. I was just talking about the schedule for the rest of the week. Coffee chat on Wednesday with Anne in Rwanda. Virtual tour with Todd again, first thing in the morning on.
I might have to put some whiskey in this coffee.
I thought I was getting the day off, but maybe I'm not. Well, hey, there you go. You're not actually drinking coffee. It's too late at night for you, isn't it?
No, I can drink coffee in bed and go to sleep. I'm very fortunate that way. Really, I can.
Reed, we're losing you again.
Okay, you know what? I'm a little surprised. Because if we'd done this weekend when the snow was blowing, that does seem to affect the Wi-Fi. But I thought that was all over. It is a little windy today, so it could be problematic. You better stay on board, Sarah, to pick up the pieces if we have our usual karmic misfunction whenever I'm involved.
Aye, Captain. I'm just sitting here in the background, so I'm just going to turn off my video. You guys talk, and if you disappear again, I'll just pick up where you left off. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
you just pick up wherever the conversation is, and we'll keep going here, and then and I'll make a comment every once in a while till you tell me you hear me.
Okay, sounds good. I didn't put my face on this morning because I didn't think I was working this morning. So I'm sorry, everybody.
Todd and I were talking before the broadcast. We are all slaves to technology. And when you're dependent on Wi-Fi, stuff happens,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I couldn't go a day without my hairdryer.
What is that, a washcloth?
Will say one thing though about the technology end of things though. You know how weird it is to think that a year ago, this concept of us talking to people we know around the world, it would have never occurred to us.
Sure.
I would have never thought to say, hey, let's call some of our tour guides that we love working with who are super cool personalities and introduce them to people. It's shocking to me that never occurred to anybody before.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm the eternal optimist, and I look at the way all this stuff is played out, and I think, man, this has actually been really cool because now I get a chance to introduce to all of my followers a really interesting person, and they're going to maybe connect with you, and maybe they'll travel with you, and that's pretty exciting. So anyway, okay, I disappear now, but I will be listening.
Okay. Well, Sarah has actually just given us a beautiful segue into our coffee chat here, meeting interesting people around the world. Todd absolutely qualifies in that way. Todd started his career in industrial catering and hospitality, but after backpacking through Africa, decided to switch over to tourism. He's passionate about cooking, which you're going to see tomorrow, wildlife, in particular birds. I've got questions about that, and also history and culture. But Todd, I want to start with, I think it's such a fascinating story. Tell that story about that backpacking trip, the length of Africa, how that led to you being involved in the tourism sector.
Sure. Hi, everybody out there. Yeah. So nice to speak to everybody from South Africa. It's great to get this opportunity. Yeah, my whole life basically took a turn. I'm going to try to keep it quick because it's a long story, which everybody tells me I should put into a book form, of course. Growing up in apartheid South Africa, our exposure to tourism was zero. It was very unpopular for tourists to come to South Africa during apartheid. We didn't even get rock music bands coming here. Businessmen came here, but there was zero tourism. There wasn't a backpackers in Cape Town, and you know how many there are now. Internal tourism was pretty much only white people that were going to the national parks who had access to them. So all of that turned on its head around about 1990, 91, when apartheid laws were slowly being scrapped, the build up to the elections in 94, Mandela's release being happening. So that opened up a lot of borders around South Africa, and a lot of borders overseas. Before that, during the apartheid era, South Africans could not travel into Botswana or Zimbabwe. These were strongholds of the ANC, the military faction of our country at that time, fighting apartheid. Even Kenya and such countries would only allow you in on a business visa, but no backpacking or tourism. I had no concept of what backpacking was. A backpack was something you used when you went climbing. That's all we knew about what a backpack was. Even the Lonely Planet was totally banned in South Africa because of the negativity written in it about the country. So in around about 92, a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, Giles Harris, who was very adventurous, and I wasn't. I was your stereotypical 9-to-5 suit and tie industrial catering guy with a company car and a company house. And he came to me and said, let's go to Kenya. And I was literally like, you have to show me on a map where Kenya is, because I have no idea where that would be. Most of my friends were heading off to London to go and work in pubs because they were welcoming South Africans. Anyway, myself and Giles, with not a clue in the world as to what we were doing, very little money, but the Rand exchange rate was still pretty good at that time. We headed off to Zimbabwe and we hit Vic Falls, and already within the first week, we met foreign travelers and our world was just wide open. Our minds were just expanding on a daily rate, because the amount of knowledge we had from, the banning of media, etc., really made us complete idiots to the outside world when we started meeting travelers. So that was the first amazing thing which inspired us to keep going. I was overweight, I had over-prepared. I had a backpack which weighed probably 30 kilograms. I had like 14 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, ridiculous things which I didn't need, which I slowly got rid of along the way. To cut a long story short, myself and Giles's plan was to get to Kenya, then from Kenya, get onto a boat with a friend of his who was coming from the Maldives area, a sailing boat, and come back to South Africa. About a 6-month trip. That 6 months turned into almost 3 years, because by the time we got to Kenya and Tanzania, we were seeing overland trucks. We were being exposed to tourism. The local people embraced us with open arms. The only hassles we got from local people were the border officials, because they were so surprised to see two white guys with a South African passport actually wanting to cross their border. In fact, Giles and I were probably two of the very first people to overland through Africa on foot. And I've got the passport to prove it, many passports. But anyway, so when we got to Kenya, that was when we started realizing that East Africa was a happening place and things were just amazing. We wanted to get jobs on the overland trucks, but being white South Africans, the companies felt that we wouldn't be accepted by the other backpackers from all over the world, because straight away the image would be, oh, two white racists, what are these guys doing? How can they tell us about Africa? All they know is the bad stuff. Anyway, that we begged and got chances, and me having a heavy duty license, him having a heavy duty license, also being able to cook and so forth, we picked up work in Kenya. And so our exposure to the actual working in tourism was happening, besides the amazing people and wonderful things we saw along the way on a shoestring budget. But I appreciated that today when I look back at it, how much more we actually did with local people having very little money than doing the sort of main tourist stuff. Anyway, then our journeys, we split. Giles ended up going with a very famous South African photographer through Africa and being part of a book that guy wrote, Obi Oberholzer. He's a very well-known photographer. And I've met up with some South Africans who now started arriving in East Africa, whose Land Rover had broken down and they'd sold it and they wanted to go to Ethiopia. And I was like, yeah, man, that sounds good. So Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, extremely amazing experiences in Sudan. Getting on a train in Khartoum and traveling through the desert all the way to Wadi Halfa, crossing Lake Aswan. I mean, you can imagine coming from, most of my life, I was 26 at this time, 26 years of living in apartheid South Africa, where you were very little exposure to much. You couldn't even buy a National Geographic. It was so difficult to get anything in the country because of sanctions. This was a mind-blowing experience for me. So the money that I had accumulated at that time got me as far as Egypt. Then in Egypt as well, met more and more travelers, was in correspondence with an old girlfriend of mine who was working in London, who was traveling to Israel, ended up in Israel, working on a moshav, which is a little bit different to a kibbutz, because you work a lot in a more for one farmer in the communal farms, but you have your own house, you cook your own food. So we were able to save money, traveled Turkey together, did odd jobs in Turkey wherever we could, working in bars, in Bodrum and places like that. And then went back to Israel, worked another stint of picking flowers where I'd previously been picking grapes, met more amazing travelers, and then finally came home. And it was literally a situation of when I came home, I was 27 kilograms lighter. I had long hair in a ponytail. I'd broken all the shackles of a very narrow mind. I was dark. I was in good shape. I'd been working hard. I'd been having fun. I'd been meeting people. It was the best thing I ever did in my life. And it was so ironic that when my sister came to meet me, and I approached her, at the airport, she thought I was begging for some change. And she said, I don't have any change, because she really didn't recognize me. I had changed physically so much. And internally, I came back with a completely different attitude. I stuck around in Johannesburg for a little while, but I had the wanderlust still. And I knew that tourism was happening in Cape Town. When 94 happened and the elections happened, 95, the elections were, prior to the elections, there was a lot of violence in South Africa between the ethnic groups that were vying for positions in the country. That was exploited a lot by our apartheid government and, to the rest of the world as, look, we're giving people the opportunity to vote for their freedom and they're fighting about it. And that was negative. But by 96, 97, tourism was starting to happen, but it was the backpackers who were coming. They were the brave ones coming and saying, hey, apartheid's over, let's go and check it out. Infrastructure-wise, wasn't quite ready for the high-end market yet, although we did have some local tourism, which was high-end. But I would say 2000 was a big turning point in South Africa. And of course, 2010 with the World Cup was an even bigger highlight for the country, because people saw the soccer happening successfully. They saw South Africans united, Invictus and all these movies, bringing people together, Mandela being such an icon. It was a phenomenal time. I'm getting goosebumps. It was a phenomenal time to be back in South Africa. And having come from travel through Africa, through the rest of Africa, it was even better for me, because finally I saw the way it should be. I'd seen it in other countries. Nobody in other countries was talking about colonialism, or any kind of apartheid system, because it had been so long that they had been out of that. Whereas we were right up into 1990s, where most of these countries in the 60s, their colonial periods had come to an end. So it was phenomenal to be in South Africa at that time. And as I say, I've been fortunate enough to then work on overland trucks in South Africa in my early 30s, which was just the backpackers, 18 to 35 only, rough and tumble, going to Namibia where there were very few lodges. You know how many there are now, camping in the bush, digging a toilet. As long as there was cold beer in the back and music playing, the tourists were happy. It was a different era. There were young people, 18 to 35, as I say, on their gap year, whatever, a lot of Aussies, a lot of Kiwis, a lot of Brits, Americans as well, Israelis. And they were, just having the time of their life seeing Africa. And there were very few rules. I mean, we had vehicles with no seat belts. The roof and the sides were canvas. You rolled them up. It was like a wagon during the old days. We drove old army vehicles, which were 30 odd years old. They never went over 80 kilometers. We worked on them a lot. The guides were called Blackfeet because we never wore shoes. We never wore a t-shirt. Now you wear a uniform, so it was a different era. And then, as I say, after the 2010 World Cup, then we started getting another generation of people as well, which were more the 45 plus people who didn't want to get on a coach, who didn't want to be with the 65 plus people. So our overland trucks started getting filled up with a lot older people. And of course, then, it became a lot more stricter. Of course, there had also been accidents throughout Africa with overland trucks, which weren't safe to be on the road. As I said, no solid roof, no seatbelt. And with the result of passengers being killed, that regulated the whole industry. So then vehicles became stricter. Guides had to get a guide license. We had to study. We had to get a first aid certificate, et cetera, et cetera. Indemnity started coming into play because you had a higher income bracket of people who weren't prepared to take risks, as far as stupid risks, because they had kids at home, et cetera, whatever. Whereas your backpacker, I mean, I knew when I was backpacker, I'd get on anything. As long as it took me to where I wanted to go. It didn't matter if it had a donkey pulling it or it was an aeroplane where the wings were flapping around. It didn't matter. But when you get to a certain age, you kind of look at the tires and go, I don't want to get on this vehicle. So I've seen the industry evolve, definitely. I've been fortunate enough to have worked with some fantastic individuals during those early days who've gone on to get married and settle down. I'm the only old crazy bugger who's still on the road from that era. There's not many of us left. But that was the choice I made. And so I'm now, as you've met me, through a more high-end market, older people, which of course I can relate to, being 56 myself. I wouldn't cope on a vehicle full of 20-somethings. I would not cope at all, because their biggest issue would be, where's the Wi-Fi? And that wouldn't be my biggest issue. So I appreciate the generation that I'm working with now. And with the companies that I've worked with, like yourself, who are very professional and take safety into consideration and comfort into consideration. So yeah, it's been a great journey, absolute great journey.
I have to chime in and say, I love your origin story, because, I've been preaching the gospel of travel for 30 years. And, I'm a true believer in the transformative element of travel. It's so much more than recreation. It is recreation, but it can be and often is life-changing. And I often say, I grew up in the Midwest, then I went to Europe for the first time, and it wasn't that my horizons were expanded, they were exploded. And I think that's a good way to characterize your experience too. When you talk about how, coming from South Africa from apartheid South Africa, where everything was restricted, and then you cross that border, and it was more than just a border from one country to another. It was from one universe to another, and the impact that it had on you. So thanks for sharing that. I've heard that story before. I'll never get tired of hearing it, because it's so much about why I travel, why you travel, why Sarah travels, why we're so important to bring this reality of travel to as many people as possible. So any of you who are out there who would like to see Africa and travel with Todd, we are on the schedule for September. Fingers crossed that will be able to happen. Hey, let's talk about the countries that we would visit on our Southern Africa tour. I've got Victoria Falls behind me here. Let's start with that. What's your take on Victoria Falls? Why should people go there? What are the highlights? Go. What do you have to tell us about Victoria Falls?
Okay, well, first of all, it's one of the natural wonders of the world now, the modern natural wonders of the world. A lot of people have seen a lot of waterfalls. I mean, South America, even in South Africa, we have some phenomenal waterfalls. Tugela Falls is a very small waterfall, thin waterfall, but it's the second highest in the world. So, waterfalls are overwhelming no matter where you go. But when you see something like Victoria as it falls, especially in a time, after the Zambezi has been in full flood, and this year the rains have been good. And as you start getting towards the end of the year, as you said, sort of August, September, October, it's beautiful because you have massive volumes of water, which is, a natural power that has an influence on you when you're standing there internally, but it's not that full that you can't see it, because believe me, there are certain times of the year when you go there, there's so much mist you can't see it. But what makes Victoria Falls even more special is, the history behind it, the discovery of it by David Livingstone. Of course, it's an iconic story, how much it means to the people. Musi Oya Tunya is the name of the local name of it, which means the noise that thunders, or the power of the noise. It is phenomenal. As you're approaching the town of Vic Falls, in the distance, you can see a microclimate evolving above the falls of clouds and what looks like rainfall from the mist. And the sound of the volume of water is just phenomenal. But what you also have to remember is the time that you spend around Victoria Falls, like you do on your trips, getting on the Zambezi and being on a boat above the falls. You've got elephants swimming across this river. You've got hippos in the water. You've got crocodiles. You've got game of various sizes on the banks, because the whole area is a national park. Now, there aren't too many waterfalls around the world where you can go and see wild animals swimming in the water, especially an African elephant crossing from Zambia into Zimbabwe. And you go on these sunset cruises where you've got a gin and tonic in your hand, you're watching the sun go down, and elephants are crossing the Zambezi, which can happen often. And you know that a couple of kilometers down the way, you've got this mighty waterfall that you were standing at early morning. So it's a phenomenal country. The people of Zimbabwe and Zambia are phenomenally friendly, as you know. They speak extremely good English, so it's very comfortable being a tourist there as well. They've also had severe hard times with economic crises in their country, COVID, of course, now as well. So supporting local tourism is absolutely vital at this stage, as you know, throughout Africa, but of course in Zimbabwe as well. I've worked with many Zimbabwean guides, and it's sad to hear that they are at the moment doing things like selling fruit on the side of the road, or, doing whatever they can, a side hustle to keep their families fed, where these guys were consummate professionals in what they did, being in the bush with them, being at the falls with them, being on a vehicle, being in a boat. This was what they lived for, and this was their backyard that they could operate in. And there's never been a generation that they know of that's experienced this kind of cutoff from tourism and from what they do best, so that's a big part of it. And then if we kind of follow your trip as well, I know that you're going to Botswana. I usually join Reed from the Cape Town section of the tour, but maybe in the future that will change as well. Maybe do more of South Africa and do an actual South African trip, which I'm really going to talk a little bit at the end of. But yeah, Zimbabwe and especially Victoria Falls is a very tourist-friendly place. You can do microlight flights over the falls, which is phenomenal. They call it the Flight of Angels. You can actually, Musi Oya Tunya, now that it's come to my mind, means the smoke that thunders. That's the name of the falls. You can do a helicopter flip over the falls, which is phenomenal to get photographs from above the falls. There's bungee jumping with the falls right behind you. So when you're hanging upside down, you're looking at the falls. There's zip lines. There's whitewater rafting, which is one of the best in the world. So the amount of activities available is phenomenal. It all depends on how much time you have. So, I know you fit in quite a lot into your schedule. You take a trip across the border and you go to the Chobe National Park on the Chobe River, which is mind-blowing. I don't know if you want to chime in there about Botswana before I carry on.
Well, actually, I more want your perspective. I've got my impressions of Botswana, but they're just anecdotal from a couple of trips there. I guess my question would be, how do you think of Botswana differently than, say, South Africa, in particular safari? What would your take be on that?
All right, I'm fortunate enough to companies that I've worked for have spent a lot of time in Botswana. I've done 14 days to 3 weeks in Botswana. So there are very few national parks in Botswana that I haven't been to, including most of the Okavango Delta, whether it be on the edges or whether it be right in the middle. Moremi, of course, as well, Savuti. I've been through these parks. The Mahadi salt pans, which are phenomenal. I mean, there's a lot of Botswana which you can't possibly fit in on just one trip. Botswana is a tour just on its own. It's waiting to happen. Because you've got deserts there, you've got the Central Kalahari Game Reserve down in the south, which is one of the largest or longest migrations of elephants and zebras and wildebeest going to find water after the rains in the Mahadi salt pans, towards the Okavango, they migrate from the southern desert areas up towards the Okavango to go and get the nutrient-rich grass. And this is the longest migration in the world of elephants, zebra, and wildebeest, whereas most people only, relate to Serengeti and the migration there. So Botswana, there's a lot happening. And I always think that people who go on a trip like yours will go back to Botswana. One of the things about Botswana, for me personally, out of all the Southern African countries I've worked in, is the guides and the people in Botswana. They are the friendliest people in Africa. There's no doubt about it. I think the only other people I would say on the same level would be Swaziland. And I think that's because there's a huge national pride. Botswanans have sort of one main ethnic group, well, tribal group, being the Tswana people, and they are very proud of their country and very proud of their heritage. They were a British colonial country, Bechuanaland at one time, but the transition into, being independent from Britain has been phenomenal. They've had some amazingly non-corrupt presidents, which is a rarity in Africa. Very conscientious of the environmental impact of tourism, these past presidents. That's why places like the Okavango Delta, which is probably my most favorite wilderness area in Africa that I've been to. One of the coolest parts about going there is that they have a low impact, high cost. So I know as a tour operator, you've really got to, work your magic to be able to get your tours to be affordable, because Botswana is by no means a cheap country to go deep into the bush and stay in one of the luxury lodges. But you have to appreciate that the more lodges and the cheaper the lodges are, the higher the impact is on the environment. And the Okavango Delta is a fragile ecosystem. We're talking about a delta which is probably not as big, but if you looked at it from above, it would be like the swamps that you have down south in America, or even the deltas going into the ocean of the Amazon. But this is a delta that doesn't reach the ocean, it goes into the desert. So think of a river starting on the west coast of Africa, in Angolan highlands, mountains in Angola, and coming all the way down towards Zambia. And because of tectonic plate movements and changes in our crust in our earth during the Gondwana breakup, this river changed course. It would have joined perhaps the Zambezi or other rivers and ended up in the Indian Ocean. We have a lot of rivers that go across continent. This would have been one of them. But with this geological fault change, the river took a right turn at a place called Mahembo, which is in Botswana. It's the border of Botswana and Namibia. And there the river changes course. So when it's coming along the border of Namibia and Angola, the Namibians call it the Kavango River, and the Angolans call it the Kavango River as well. When it comes into Botswana, it becomes the Okavango River. So the river has a history. It sustains population groups all over that part of Africa, Zambia and Angola and Namibia. There are parts of Namibia who rely on that river for their farming, and the wildlife are teeming in those areas along that river. So not only does the Delta have a pristine wildlife area, you've got places like the Caprivi Strip of Namibia, which is influenced by the Kavango. So this river is a lifeblood for wildlife and for people. So building dams and doing all these kind of things has been forbidden by all governments involved. And when governments have said we're going to create a hydroelectric system, other governments have literally threatened war, because there's a silt that comes into the delta in a natural process. And also because of the reeds and the papyrus, you can actually, I would as a guide, but obviously tourists have a little more sensitive stomach, you can take your water bottle and just scoop it deep into the river or in the delta channels that are wide and the water is deep. It's crystal clear. You can drink that water. It's very few toxins. It's not polluted because of the sand and the reeds. They're natural filtration systems. So if you start creating industry, you're going to destroy the delta. If you start getting too much tourism, it creates waste, unfortunately, garbage and sewage. This will affect it. So high cost, low impact. That's how Botswana works their tourism, especially around these fragile ecosystems. And I appreciate that, because I've been to some countries where they put tourism before the environment, and that's not a good thing. You know this. Even the exploitation of animals, it's becoming banned now, with the petting of things and the riding of things. None of that is good. It doesn't do anything good for wildlife. So Botswana has a very, very conscientious attitude towards the preservation of their country's natural phenomena, which is the Okavango. So I know that you also spend time on the Chobe River, which I've also been on many, many times. Phenomenal. There again, elephants in the water, thousands of buffalo, grazing on the side of the banks, lion, very possible to even see a lion on the bank coming to drink. It's Eden. the Chobe River is Eden. There's no other way to describe it. And I know, I know you've been to East Africa. You can't compare, and gorillas that's an Eden in its own. But when it comes to Southern African wildlife areas where there's a river that is just creating this lush paradise, Chobe is one of the best. One of the best boat cruises you can do anywhere in Africa. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, you're stealing all my thunder here.
Sorry.
No, this is your version is far better than mine. But I would chime in and say that sunset cruise on the Chobe River is just enchanting. The light is perfect for photographs. All the animals are coming down to the banks to drink, and depending on the time of year, I mean, if you're there when there's any sort of water scarcity, then it's the only place for them to get a drink, and you just see absolutely everything. Elephants ripping salad out of the bottom of the river to eat, and dozens and dozens and hundreds of hippos always.
Sure.
That's
yeah. I mean, to be on the boat, you're going to get that money shot. You're going to get the hippo with his display, with his mouth open, as you say, elephants pulling out, vegetation from the bottom of the banks. And September, as you do your tour, is actually coming to the end of the dry season, which is winter. So the amount of, and I mean, you see people with cameras that just put the camera down and go, I can't do this. It's just too much. I don't know where to start, The boats as well. Also, the guides are phenomenal. They get you as close as what is, respectable to the animals. So even with a normal cell phone, you can get insane photos. The bird life on these rivers. September is one of the times when the migrating birds are returning. So they're coming there in preparation now for their mating season. So they've got to, get their nests going. And you've got just an amazing array of water birds there, from spoonbills to herons to kingfishers of various species of kingfishers. It's a birder's paradise there. And if you want to see, wildlife coming to the end of, let's say, the COVID epidemic, almost like people are going to celebrate. This is what these animals are doing. They're coming through a long, dry winter where it's dusty and dry, and the grass is just unpalatable. And they come down to this river, and the grass is lush along the banks and on the islands. And even buffalo, the water is shallow enough at this time for the buffalo to swim across and stay permanently on a small island. Until they've, the season is changing now and they move back to the mainland. It's phenomenal. And it's also the meeting point of 3 countries, which have had various, grievances over who belongs to what. Some of them even taken to international boundary commissions to find out who the land belongs to. So you've got Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana all meeting on this river at certain points, which is quite phenomenal as well. And of course, this river eventually joins the Zambezi and goes over the falls too.
Right. I want to make sure we get to every stop on the tour. So now we're going to go to your backyard. Technically, your backyard is where you are right now, is Johannesburg. But I know that you've spent a ton of time in Cape Town, and that's where we meet up with you typically. And Cape Town is one of my favorite destinations because of the diversity of experience there. I mean, you've got Robben Island, from the apartheid period. You've got a great waterfront. You've got Long Street with restaurants and bars. It's a lot of energy and a lot of fun. Bo-Kaap, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah. But just to stop you there, Reed, you do spend time in National Park before you leave Johannesburg, don't you?
No, we do not spend any time in Joburg at all. So
all right, okay. So so carry on. The Bo-Kaap, you pronounced it fine, great, perfect.
Okay, I wish we could throw some images up here, but that'll come on Friday, of course. And of course, while we're there, we always take an excursion down to Cape Point. We have a day in the winelands, right? There's a great South African wine industry there, and we go and explore that a little bit. A full free day for people to do whatever they want. Table Mountain, of course, is a classic experience. So, I mean, I'm giving the tour director's perspective, but now let's hear yours. I mean, you've got 3 days in Cape Town. Well,
first of all, let me start. That was the place that I met you, and of course, I also met your brother, the Cohen brothers, who are now legends. I'm still wearing the same T-shirt you gave me back then. Yeah. We had a lot of fun in Cape Town. It was an amazing time for me as well, because I saw passionate guys arrive with people who'd done some of the toughest traveling in East Africa, been to see some phenomenal animals and phenomenal traditional places and people. And now they had the chance to unwind and relax and really absorb the cosmopolitan atmosphere that you have in Cape Town. Reed, are you still with us, Reed? I think we might have lost Reed. Sarah, help. I can just keep talking.
I'm here. Keep going.
We lost for a minute, but I think you're back.
Okay. Okay.
So carry on with your story.
Cool. So yeah, these weather-beaten folks would arrive at the airport late at night, and I'd be there to greet them, and I knew that they really needed to unwind. So the 3 days that we spent in Cape Town, I think, was just a restart of the battery for everybody before, especially those going forward onto Namibia, and even those returning home. They could go home nice and fresh, have a chance to get their laundry done, and there's no malaria and there's no mosquitoes, and it was just Cape Town is a phenomenal place. So arriving in Cape Town, obviously one of the most iconic things that people recognize is the mountain. I spent 30 years living in Cape Town. I grew up in Johannesburg and I'm back in Johannesburg, but I love Cape Town. It's very hard not to love Cape Town. It's been voted as one of the best cities in the world. It also, a few years ago, won an award for being the design capital of the world. So everything from the architecture of the buildings is phenomenal, because you've got colonial style buildings like the City Hall with the British influence. You've got the history of the slaves that were there. There was a almost 200-year period of slavery, which a lot of people aren't aware of, when the Dutch first arrived to establish a refreshment station for the ships coming around. So the history of Cape Town, I could spend an hour talking about. It's the starting point of the colonization of southern or South Africa, basically. So the history is very strong. Battles were fought between the British and the Dutch. Twice the British fought the Dutch, very, very brief battles, and eventually it became under rule of the Nationalist Party. So there's a lot of history there. Robben Island, of course, being a very historical and a very emotional place to go and visit, with the history of not only Mandela, but very many of our amazing political activists who sacrificed a lot for change in the country. So that's an iconic island. Beyond that, even before that, the island was a leper colony. It was a prison during the time of the Sultans coming around with their ships. The British, they even imprisoned people there. So it's been a prison for many, many years, even before it became a political prison. Of course, now it's a fantastic museum. The restaurants in Cape Town are phenomenal. They're on world class, from Michelin star restaurants to traditional restaurants, which we go to with Reed, and we have a lot of fun. Traditional music, traditional food, traditional performances. It's a very tourist friendly city, and of course, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's
actually,
also had.
Can I just ask you a question then? Because I would say my first impression of the idea of going to someplace like Cape Town is, I'm programmed to think, oh, that seems like a dangerous place. Don't I remember somebody being carjacked there once? Or, I mean, I know we've all heard stories about how traveling in Johannesburg or Cape Town could potentially be dangerous. So I imagine it's not. So, but just if you could tell us a little bit.
Like every city in the world, there are good areas and bad areas. Obviously, even when we take tourists into a former township or an area that is very poor, it is very regulated. You have a local guide with you who knows the community. You're taken to specific places, whether it be a school or a community hall or whatever, or to a restaurant. And so it is regulated, but you have a high degree of poverty around the city, as you do in Rio and many places like that. It's not hidden away, which is good. You will see it. You can't avoid it coming from the airport to the city. There are squatter camps or shanty houses lining the freeway. And then, of course, you'll get into the opulence of areas like Camps Bay, where houses are sold for 36 million rand, because they are mostly owned by foreigners who come over with euros, of course, and can buy these seafront villas at a very low cost because of the exchange rate. But I'm not dishing those people. They create jobs for the people who clean those houses, clean those windows, maintain those gardens, do the plumbing, fix the electrics. They pay their rates and taxes like everybody else. They're most welcome to come and invest in the country in that way. But you're going to see a high degree of ultra rich and ultra poor. But what's cool about Cape Town is they get along. So they will be side by side at a theater or an open air music festival or a football game or whatever, and they'll be, as proud as anything of their country. So there is a very cosmopolitan feel to Cape Town. There's a lot of foreigners living in Cape Town, a lot of foreign students. Obviously, COVID has changed that slightly now. A lot of them have gone home. but a lot of German students, a lot of German schools. We have a lot of young people who've married into a South African family who now live in Cape Town. So that influence is there. Of course, we have the indigenous people of the Cape, known as the Cape Colored people. I know in America the word colored is taboo, but it is their actual title in South Africa. These are people who came from the original slaves who came from different parts of Africa, also from Indonesia. Tomorrow night I'm cooking a Cape Malay dish because a lot of Malaysians were there as slaves, and they over time, even though apartheid made it illegal to integrate, but over time, you know, between 1652 and 1948, you had interracial sex. So you had people being born of mixed race with either a white father or a white mother. Of course, during apartheid, there was a law against that. So it stunted the growth of the Cape Colored people. However, that's changed now as well. There's a lot more integration in South Africa. So there's another whole history, a whole tribal group, if you want to call it, coming from Cape Town. And they have their own culture and history in Cape Town, which is phenomenal. They're extremely open and friendly people. That there's so many languages spoken in Cape Town. There's people speaking French, there's people speaking German, there's Afrikaans, which is a traditional sort of indigenous language coming from the Dutch. Xhosa, which is a lot of clicks, is another language spoken in Cape Town. So it's a very diverse cultural city.
What you're reminding me of right now, Todd, is the value of taking a tour. Like, I'm an independent traveler when I travel on my own, but honestly, the complexity of Southern Africa absolutely warrants being with somebody who can explain it to you. I mean, I think about what places are a really smart place to have a guide. Like France, England, you're actually probably going to be fine on your own, but someplace like Southern Africa, it sounds complicated. Like, it really sounds like it's valuable.
But what's amazing is if you have the right guide, and there are many of them in Cape Town as well. So I just happen to love history. But what's phenomenal about Cape Town is how it all began. You know, obviously there were a lot of indigenous people in Central Africa moving south. But in the actual beginning, before those Central African groups reached the south and before the white colonial groups started moving from the south north, you had the indigenous San people, which are phenomenal people in themselves because their origins are almost unknown. You know, they have similar features to your Mongolian people in the Mongolian areas. But these also known as the Bushmen. These were traditional hunter-gatherers who wrote sand paintings. We're going to see them you see them on the trip with Reed and I. So Cape Town also embraces that heritage. Their culture is slowly coming alive because it was totally obliterated by apartheid. And also they were caught in the middle because you had black African tribal groups moving south with their cattle, and you had white colonial people like the Dutch fleeing the British and their cattle, and of course the poor Bushmen who were hunter-gatherers were caught in the middle. So they suffered under the hands of the Zulu, for instance, under Shaka, and they suffered by the British, who even issued permits to kill them because they were considered vermin. So their history almost disappeared, and it's slowly being revitalized, and their place in South Africa is very much shown in places like the museums in Cape Town and in wording and different things that are pointed out by guides. But as soon as the Dutch established this refreshment center, you had ships coming from Britain, Spain, Italy, France, Holland, going to India, going to China. You know, this was a trade route. So Cape Town became like London, but in a different way, because you had people from all over the world. It was a harbor. It wasn't a city like it is now. It was a harbor. That's all it was, a massive harbor.
Yeah, well, it's funny you talk about this because I just did a talk on Saturday for people about Venice and about how Venice was the master of the Mediterranean. And after the Vasco da Gama went around the Cape of Good Hope, that became Venice, basically. That became the most important port that people needed to be able to do trade. So, yeah, so it's interesting because it probably has the same multicultural sort of heritage.
Sure. I mean, if you look at early paintings of Cape Town before the British really sort of developing the city as a vital city and a parliament, they created a parliament and a city hall. Before that, there were Dutch farmers. Below Cape Town, below Table Mountain, I should say, were farms, growing fruits and vegetables and keeping sheep and goats for the boats. And there was a beach. Now, when you're in the city, in front of you is no beach. There's a harbor because the British pushed back nearly 8 kilometers of ocean and created a harbor, the waterfront. Before that, waterfront was there. It was a beach washing up onto farmland where there were forests. Those forests have gone. There were leopards and lions roaming around Table Mountain. The Cape lion was the largest lion in Africa. It's extinct. The zebra, some of the origins of the zebra, the quagga, came from the Cape. Why do we call it the Cape buffalo, but we see it in Kenya? because the first white people who saw buffalo was in Cape Town. So they called it a Cape buffalo, a Cape hunting dog, although you see them in Kenya and Botswana. So a lot of the names of animals came from Cape Town because it was the first place Europeans saw them, and then slowly started moving inland. So
Yes,
Cape Town is phenomenal. Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
the first foothold of Europeans in Africa. And I just
Exactly.
wonder, as a guide, the legacies of colonialism must be kind of difficult to discuss. I know that it's hard sometimes to have difficult conversations with
Sure.
groups. I know that there are a lot of topics in countries that I guide in where you
Sure.
have to say, look, maybe we think Europeans are the good guys, but they're not always the good guys. And those
No,
are
sure.
difficult conversations to have. How do you tackle that subject when you talk about colonialism with your groups?
It does get better with time and experience, but I think, as I was pointing out earlier, definitely my travels, going and backpacking through Africa and meeting people other than just the people who are oppressed in this country, people who had been free for so long and had different perspectives on their culture and their heritage. And then also, meeting other individuals from other countries and learning about their history and culture. You do have to, navigate your way through these rivers in a sensitive way. To especially today, people have become a lot more sensitive to people's rights and people's feelings, which is great. It's absolutely perfect. One of the things that opened my eyes in East Africa was the only time I ever got hassled being a white South African was when I encountered backpackers who were white in a pub or a bar, never from a local. I never walked into a pub or a bar or a guest house or crossed the border where I was labeled a white racist. Never. As soon as they heard my accent, the first thing would be talking about soccer and Nelson Mandela and friendship. Whereas my first interaction with a lot of Europeans encountering their first young white South African was hostile. So you have to understand that people come with preconceived ideas. It would be exactly the same as if I came to America. My preconceived ideas would be from the internet and from the news, and we know how skewed that is as well. So you've got to understand what people have in their mind, and you've got to let that belief system be there, but just try and get them to understand that there's more to what they hear from their own country. And by interacting with people all the time in these countries, not only myself, but other guides and people we meet along the way, people you meet in restaurants in Cape Town, on your wine tours, you can really, really explain the culture very easily. Because I can sit in front of a Cape colored person and talk about the fact that he's a Cape colored and he comes from a mixed race family and blah, 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 and he's totally comfortable with it. And I can sit and also talk to people from having experience living through apartheid. I lived most of my youth and my teenage years and even being forced to join the army during apartheid because I couldn't flee the country as a white South African with a passport, the South African passport, unless you had relatives overseas. So I've experienced different genres of apartheid from a white perspective. And then having been in guiding for so long, it's 25 years almost now, working with Black South Africans, Black Zimbabweans, Botswanans, Zambians, I've heard their stories. I've sat in vehicles with them for 8 hours a day. When we're not interacting with tourists, we're talking about our lives. So that gives me a lot more latitude to talk to people about culture when I've immersed myself into cultures by just having conversation.
Isn't that interesting as tour guides? I look at all of us, and all of us we're almost like historical sponges or documents or something like that, because we're kind of amalgamators. We reach out to people from different cultures and we try to dig a little bit deeper. And I think about so many of the tour guides I know that have lived through things that I can't even imagine. My friend in Cambodia who lived through the Pol Pot regime, like, you're a living document having experienced apartheid, and what a cool experience to be able to actually
to actually walk into an apartheid museum or a place. It's emotionally difficult, especially when you were in the military or you were in school and you saw protests and you heard your parents saying things like, when the black people take over the country, we're all going to be murdered in our beds. This is the things you heard. But it's not unlike, you've had in your own country with white supremacy and so forth. I don't want to go into that, but, the fear-mongering begins and it grows very fast. We didn't have the internet during apartheid. It would have been worse. But I think it would have also, it probably would have been a quicker transition into a change had we had more freedom of the press, etc. That's another whole issue as well. But yes, I think dialogue is very important when you travel. You can't keep your face stuck in your phone. You can't keep just, reading what TripAdvisor is telling you and so forth, and reading all your emails every day. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to the Wi-Fi. I love the fact that I can use it as a tool for work, but as a traveler who traveled without Wi-Fi, I know how important it is to have dialogue with people when you're in a country. And that's how, Reed is much the same. When we go somewhere and we're on a vehicle or we're with local people, we encourage conversation, because that's way better than anything you're going to read in a book, which is from an educated perspective.
I'm so glad you feel that way, because
a groomed perspective, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
the best thing in most countries is not necessarily the famous site you came to see, but it could just be the conversation you have with a local.
Exactly. No, you can read about the townships, and you can have a mental picture of what they would be like. But when you actually meet somebody who lives in a township and they tell you about their home, you'll either be surprised and actually go, wow, it's very modern, or you'll be shocked and go, gee, how do they manage with so little? And that's exactly what you were saying earlier, to go back to your question about safety. I've had hundreds of days on foot in a city like Johannesburg and Cape Town, and I can honestly say that I've never had any of my tourists physically attacked. I've had a necklace snatched off somebody's neck, which could have happened anywhere in the world.
I had that in Sicily in a market.
Exactly. I got mugged in. I got mugged in Marseille. I got mugged in London at one of the music festivals. I had my backpack taken off my back. I mean, I got mugged by street kids. It was actually quite a funny story. If you want to hear it quickly.
Sure.
I'll try keep it short. In Ethiopia, myself and a friend were backpacking through Ethiopia, and we were in Addis Ababa, and we were in the really bad part of town. And these little street urchins came out. They were a bit like Oliver Twist. They just came out of every nook and cranny. There must have been 12 of them around us at no time. And they all just grabbed our legs. And before we knew it, we were face down with a big, heavy backpack on our back. And they just went through our pockets. And they were so well orchestrated that we actually looked at each other and smiled, because we'd obviously hidden our money belts where they couldn't get to them. But we were just like, this is so organized. So all I'm trying to say is that muggings and things can happen all the time. We have gangs which operate in some of the poorest areas of Cape Town, which are some of the worst in the world. So, when you look at statistics of the country as to on a weekend, how many people are murdered, how much rape there is, it's horrifying, and it would scare tourists away. But it is something that is very isolated to a specific area, which is socio-economically impacted by drugs and gangs and so many influences which are being worked on as we speak. There's progress all the time to try and eradicate this kind of thing, but it doesn't spill into the mainstream tourism areas, because I think also people in South Africa and throughout Africa in some cities realize that tourism is a lifeblood. And if you bite those fingers, you get no food.
Yeah, it's so funny, your story about being mugged in Ethiopia, because, maybe people listening to that go, well, that was Ethiopia. I was mugged in Paris when I was 10 years old.
There we go.
I was attacked by street kids with newspapers when I was 10 years old in front of the Eiffel Tower. That was my first experience with Paris. So it can happen anywhere. So to go back to,
sure.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, on a lighter topic, I have heard that the wine in South Africa is fantastic.
That's what I was just going to say, we need to get back onto track. Otherwise Reed's going to be like crazy.
Poor guy, he just texted me that his internet's down, but hey, cool. I'm there, so let's keep going.
So like I said, the restaurants are phenomenal. We do visit some amazing restaurants on his trip as well. Accommodation varies from backpackers to high-end hotels, so it's always comfortable. And Reed always picks great spots where you can get an Uber, you can get around when in your free time. Uber operates perfectly in Cape Town. It's great. Absolutely. I promise you, it is much easier to operate as a tourist in Cape Town than it is in Paris or in London. Way easier. I promise you, it's really easier. It's a small city, so it's not big that you have to continually rely on trams and buses and things to get around. You can literally walk around Cape Town, the whole city, in half a day. It's that easy, and see the highlights in half a day. Then when you go out of the city and you start heading to the winelands, well, there again, we've got a long history of the French Huguenots coming out of Holland into, being invited to Cape Town by the early settlers, creating this wine industry, some of the best and most fertile areas in the world for growing some of our wines, like Pinotage, which is a fusion of two cultivars, not a blend. They actually fused the plants from the Pinot Noir and the Hermitage and made a unique cultivar which doesn't grow anywhere else in the world successfully. Nowhere. Germany's tried it, America, California, everywhere they've tried it. New Zealand's tried it. It fails as a wine. So it's a unique wine to South Africa. But our wineland is not just Stellenbosch. It's Franschhoek, it's Durbanville, it's up our west coast now. We've got winelands going up into areas which were wheat growing areas because of this realization that the west coastal air is misty and it comes across the vines and creates this perfect wine. So we've got some wine farms now stretching right up our coastlines, east and west. They're not just around Cape Town. So our wine industry is growing. Wine consumption is popular in South Africa, so there is a big local market. Restaurants have amazing selections of wine. People are blown away by the prices because of the exchange rate. So, you know, you can comfortably, and I'm talking restaurant prices now, which are always inflated, as you know, you can comfortably buy a superb bottle of red wine for under, for about $10.
What?
Yeah, 200 Rand is a good red wine, no problem. Personally, my favorite wine I would buy in a bottle store when I pay the liquor store price would be 80 Rand, 80 to 90 Rand. That would be a very, very good red wine that I could enjoy without showing off. So if you convert that, divide that by sort of almost 20, you're looking at about $4 for a really good bottle of red wine.
Okay, as soon as I'm vaccinated, I'm on a plane. I can guarantee you, Todd, when I come to a tour with you, which will probably be in 2023, we're going to wineries. That's going to be
and our wineries are not shy. You know, they pour you a glass of wine to taste. They don't give you a sip. So wine tasting,
and it's sunny there too, right? There's always sun, I think.
Absolutely. And September is a beautiful time of the year in Cape Town to be on a wine farm, because also it's very green now. The vines are totally full of leaves. The grapes are out, but they're not ready. You know, picking only starts around about January. But it's spring. Springtime in Cape Town is wonderful because Cape Town, unlike Johannesburg, has winter rain. It's called a Mediterranean climate, Cape Town. It has winter rain. Johannesburg has summer rain. They're totally opposite. They get occasional rain in Cape Town in summer, but it's a winter rainfall area.
So when would you suggest people go on a trip like this? What is
September is an iconic time, September, October, because it's also, as I said, the change of the season. So it is beautiful to be in Cape Town in winter, but you have a lot of rainy days, and that for a tourist doesn't work. You know, you don't want rainy days. Summer, of course, the best month if you're the summer person, if you want to go there for the beaches and to lie in the sun. Remember, the water's cold. Even in the midsummer, you're looking at a maximum, if you're lucky, of about 18, 19 degrees. The average temperature of the water is around between 12 and 16 most of the year. So it's a cold water that you're swimming in. It's the Atlantic. But if you're a sun bunny, you go in February, March. You want to avoid South Africa. Or I shouldn't say this. We want all the tourists here as often as possible. But you have to realize that our summer school holidays, our big holidays, the month, and the universities is November, December, January period. Over those 3 months, you know, late November through December to early January is a very busy time in Cape Town and national parks and anywhere you are in South Africa. So I would say, you know, September is a fantastic time.
Would August also work? Would that be the time to do
August is good. You're still going to have a little bit of rain and quite a bit of wind in Cape Town, but you know, you're going to have great days. You know, even in Cape Town in the midwinter, your average temperature during the day is between sort of 14 and 19. It never goes colder than that. So putting on a warm jacket, you find, you know, Johannesburg actually has colder winters because we're at 1,700 meters. I don't know what that is in feet, whereas in Cape Town at sea level. So yeah, September, late August, September, October, perfect months to be in Cape Town. Springtime, it's beautiful. It's had lots of rain. Everything's green. The birds are coming back again as well. Yeah, it's a good time in Cape Town to
Well, I'm just thinking of how can I plan it so my sons can come with me, because I'm sure you and my older son would get along like a house on fire. So,
awesome.
So I know one of the things that Reed is offering as a part of this Southern Africa tour is an extension into Namibia. Now, I know Namibia is potentially not on anybody who's watching their bucket list. So please tell us why people should want to go to Namibia.
Okay, to go back to my early backpacking days, when I went on this phenomenal journey, I sort of went up the east side. So I went from South Africa to Zimbabwe and then carried on from there. When I came home, I had never been to Namibia, except during the military time of the apartheid era, because the border of Namibia and Angola was a war zone, which was the Namibians, which was called Southwest Africa, fighting for independence out of the apartheid, same apartheid rule. So Namibia was a part of South Africa during apartheid, which a lot of people are not aware of. If you look at the maps of South Africa pre-1990, so it was still called Southwest Africa, which was the German colonial name. When the First World War, I'm going to quickly do this. When the First World War started, Britain encouraged South Africa, being an ally of Britain, they encouraged South Africa to go in there and take it over from the Germans. So we did. And it became a South African colony. So it was under the same apartheid laws, under the South African flag, the South African currency, and the South African government, and the South African army and police. So the people, which was a very small population, Namibia, what's wrong?
Sorry,
Everything
I
okay?
think my son is like, his head is exploding because he just got the news that Seattle School District is going to go back into session in April. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
My 6-year-old is bursting into flames. Sorry.
Okay, so Namibia only has a small population. It's just under 2 million at the moment. During the time of apartheid, during the 70s up to about the 90s, we're looking at about 1.2, 1.3 million people. Very small population, very difficult to stand up to an apartheid government like the South African government had. So they went to Angola and got help from Angola to fight a war against South Africa. So we had a 12-year war basically on the border of Angola and Namibia. That was my only experience of Namibia, was going there as a soldier. In 1990, Namibia became independent. It's a new country. So a lot of people don't know that as well. So it's also new in tourism. It's developed very much. But so for me, coming back to South Africa after my phenomenal travel, to get the opportunity to go on an overland truck with a bunch of tourists as their guide to Namibia and not be wearing a uniform was super cool. And I saw the southern part of Namibia, which I didn't see as a soldier. I only saw the border of Angola. So I saw things like the Fish River Canyon, the Orange River, the Sausage Desert, which we're going to talk about now. So it was mind-blowing as well, because East Africa is nothing like Namibia. Namibia is like, it's like the southern part of West Africa, if you know what I'm saying. It's the southwestern part of Africa. So you've got this phenomenal desert wedged against the ocean, which is older than the Sahara, smaller but older, with 300-meter high natural sand dunes, which are red in color. It's amazing. I always say to people, 2 places in the world where I've realized that I am just a little speck of paint on a massive portrait is to be in the Sausage Desert in Namibia and to be in the Okavango Delta, where you totally realize that the universe is way bigger than you can comprehend. Namibia is, and you have
the African deserts can make you feel that way. I felt the same way driving through the Egyptian desert, and the other thing is that people may be thinking, well, going to see sand dunes, how exciting is that? But you can't explain how amazing it is. Like,
and also the thing is, the country is not just one big desert. It's not like that at all. You have this Namib Desert running along the edge of the coastline, which is a cold water coastline. So it's also a phenomenal coastline because it's one of the major fishing areas. It's very rich in sea life. The African sea lions have colonies all along that coast. Pelicans migrate there. Flamingos migrate there, which we often see on our trips. Whales, the southern right whales, come past there to feed before they head south. So the ocean as well of Namibia is teeming with life and vitality as well. It has some very important harbors like Swakopmund, Walvis Bay, which is a very big commercial harbor, which is important to the country. As a lot of people know, diamonds originated from the ocean as well, having washed down rivers into the ocean over millions of years, then being deposited onto the beaches, being mined off the beaches, now being mined off the ocean. So of course, with national parks in these desert areas, these are free of any kind of mining or anything. And so there is another whole ecosystem in there as well. You have oryx, which is a type of antelope, which have learned to adapt to body temperatures of 47, 48 degrees. You have small lizards and insects which can burrow under the sand and survive for days on one bubble of oxygen. You have plant life, which you won't find anywhere else in the world. And what's phenomenal about Namibia is not only do you have this strip of super pristine desert, which doesn't matter whether you're a good photographer or not, you're going to have the bluest sky and the reddest sand. You're going to get great photos. As you move inland, you have plateaus. And above those plateaus, you have grasslands and savannas. And then you have bush, just like you have now in other parts of Africa, teeming with animals. And you have the Etosha National Park, which is around a salt pan. So there's a lot to Namibia. It's not just a desert.
Natural sightseeing. So
absolutely, there are parts of Namibia which Americans would relate to places like Utah, with sandstone structures and phenomenally shaped mountains. Because you have to understand that Africa had glaciers, we had ice ages, we had volcanic eras. When Gondwana split, Africa was turned on, it was shaken around and things happen. So there are parts of Namibia where we go to where you can buy crystals and amazing semi-precious stones from the local people, which are mined all over the place. There are places where you can walk and there are crystal rocks below your feet. Because a lot of countries, after they had ice ages or volcanic ages, they had a warm ocean, and so you had lush vegetation growing, like some volcanic islands. You had this lush, whereas Namibia is raw and bare. It's a geologist's dream because the rock formations there are some of the oldest in the world. So your sunrises and your sunsets in Namibia are breathtaking because it's phenomenal. Now, to give you a good example, you might not have watched this movie, but now you must. Mad Max, Mad Max?
Yeah.
The last Mad Max movie with Charlize Theron in it, who's also a South African, by the way,
yeah,
was shot in Namibia in a place called Brandberg, which is very, very close to where we go with Reed. So if you watch that movie now and you see some of the scenes that were shot there, you'll go, oh my God, it's amazing. So
well,
yeah, Namibia,
and I'm ready to go. You've convinced me. So just so everybody knows, the tour that we've been talking about, this is just kind of basing our discussion on what Reed and Todd do together. It's a little less than 3 weeks, and it seems almost impossible that all the things you've described you could do in a little less than 3 weeks. So basically that whole Botswana, Namibia, South Africa zone just sounds like it's so rich with things to do.
And a lot of people who do go to Namibia as an independent traveler, you need to be, prepared for getting a 4x4, some pretty bad roads, can't get stuck without water in places. So being on a tour in Namibia is absolutely the right way to go, but you can drive for hours and see nobody. So it's that kind of country with a small population. It's a huge country, probably the size of Texas, with 2 million people living in it. Can you imagine?
Wow. We did have a question, which I think is an interesting one. Somebody was asking that they have that their partner is 80 years old. How would you suggest an older traveler approach visiting Southern Africa? Because it sounds a little rough around the edges, like in Namibia for sure. But what would be an easier way, a more accessible way to travel there?
Look, I mean, they are very, very, very. I've had people as old as 83 on some of my trips. The long distances can be taxing. And sometimes it does get very hot, even though it's spring. You're coming at the end of the dry winter, so it can get up in the 30s, in the high 30s. I'm talking Celsius. So dehydration is a major factor which makes people very ill. We don't have to worry about malaria and cholera and those kind of things on our trip, but dehydration is the biggest problem. But flying to places and arranging excursions which are shorter in time and having better types of accommodation, it can all be done. It can absolutely be done. I mean, all the places I've described, whether it's Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, or Namibia, can be done with people who are much older. Obviously, they need to be able to walk up a flight of stairs and, pick up their bag. That's always a good sign that you can travel and have, relatively good health. But as far as, even having a thing like somebody with sleep apnea, there's electricity everywhere we go, even if it's generated or solar powered, that's not a problem. Even something like that, or, where you need a machine or something to be plugged in. I've had travelers on my trips who have insulin. We have cooler boxes and fridges on our vehicles. It's very modern and very sophisticated traveling in Southern Africa. Absolutely. Just want to actually mention something before I forget. Reed was asking me about the situation in South Africa with tourism before we started chatting. We have no international tourism. Our COVID situation has had its peaks and drops. We went through a second wave. We are thankfully at the moment right at the end of that, but we are expecting, so we've been told, it's very hard to know what's going to happen anymore in the future. We're expecting to have a third wave. Vaccinations are rolling out. I think there's about nearly 150,000 vaccines that have in my area, but I know we've had lots of vaccines that are starting to be rolled out to the frontline workers. At the moment, we have 1,529,420 positive cases, of which 1,454,219 have recovered. So we have a 90% recovery rate. And at the moment, like yesterday, our daily death rate was 65, which is not bad when we have a country of 57 million people. It's pretty good.
That's low.
Yesterday was only 1,000 new cases, and we've got 51,326 total deaths. But the discipline of South Africans is phenomenal. people wear masks, people do what they're told, they sanitize their hands, they keep social distance. There are obviously some people who, you know, have parties and things. It does happen, but we're already on a level 1 now. We started a year ago on level 5, and we're already down to level 1. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that people have really taken leadership seriously and guidance seriously, whether you dispute it or not. We've done what we've been asked to do, and it's paying off. Unfortunately, we had a different strain of virus here as well, which scared a lot of countries away. So when we started seeing a little trickle of tourism coming in, it stopped very quickly. So the British tourists and the Australian tourists, as a tour guide, it's very hard for me to predict where we're at. We're looking now at, you know, Australia and especially Australia, maybe only next year. But a lot of European countries are going to be heading into summer now, which is their holiday time, June, July, August. And I know that countries like France and Switzerland and Spain and Italy, they want to get out and travel, but obviously, you know, vaccinations are going to help, and we have to see how it plays out.
So is South Africa open right now, or is it closed to tourism?
It's open to some countries, but not all. I'm not sure exactly which countries, but a lot of the countries that it is open to, those countries won't allow tourists to come here. So it doesn't always mean that if you're open to tourism, they will come, because their country is saying, we don't want a different strain coming back with you. But that, with vaccinations now, that might change everything. And as I say, with our numbers dropping, we're just hoping that when we're moving now into winter, that we don't suddenly have another spike, which seems to be the norm, but perhaps not with now vaccination happening. I don't know. I'm not an expert, and I don't profess to be one.
But what is your prediction? What is your prediction for when the travel will be open again to Americans? We're speaking to a mostly American audience. So when do you think that it'll be open to Americans? Just take.
I think, yeah, I would say if we can get through our winter, say around about August, where we're starting to head towards our spring, and our numbers are low, they'll come.
Okay, and it'll be open.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're already talking about maybe June, July, looking at restructuring, opening of borders, depending on the numbers and so forth. As I was saying to Reed before this, as tour guides, I mean, it's been difficult. It's one of the industries that is the last to recover. You know, the media industry, the film industry, they also took a hammering. Events like live music, these kind of things, they took a hammering, and they're still struggling because we still have curfews. Our curfew is 12 o'clock at midnight to 4 in the morning. You're not allowed to be moving around the country, which is not bad. It was a lot worse. The sale of alcohol has now been opened up, which was restricted over December, January, which I think was a very difficult for South Africans who like to party, but it was necessary because that's our highest time of car accidents, and because it's our holidays. So it kept the hospitals freed up, which was, you know, took a lot of discipline, but people, they stuck to the rules, and that paid off. But it's been very difficult. But on one note, I just want to make a mention of, I mean, in the 25 years that I've been doing this for companies, I've had the luxury of having private tourists also do some trip with me. And 13 years ago, a couple from Austria, Andreas and Waltraud, joined me on an organized tour with a group of people. And after the tour, they kept in touch with me and said, we would love to travel independently with you. They have come to do a tour with me every year for 13 years.
Wow.
We have done Namibia twice. We have done Botswana. We have done South Africa many times in different places. So every year, except for this year and last year so far. Well, last year, they usually come in September. They couldn't come last year because of COVID. I visited them in Austria, and I was supposed to go over there last year in June, and I couldn't go because of COVID. So they're hoping to be coming in September. But why I'm mentioning Andreas and Waltraud is we have actually become family now. And it's much like, you know, Imprint Tours has their clients who are regulars and they become family, but I'm not a bigger company. I'm just, you know, an individual. But this couple have really become my travel family, and they enjoy being on my tours, and I enjoy having them. And we see many more trips together coming. But during this COVID period, without their financial help, I would not have survived, and I would not be speaking to you today. I would have really had to sell a lot of my assets and probably move out of the place that I stay in and downgrade my lifestyle in a major way. So if they are going to be watching this at some point, I really want to thank them from the bottom of my heart that they really have kept my spirits up throughout this bad time. You know, and a lot of tour guides have had that kind of help from clients and from guests, and it's been very appreciated.
Yeah, that gives me chills actually, because that's that I'm in the same situation, that I'd have lost my house if I hadn't had the support of the people who are watching this today, the people who support me on Patreon or whatever.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
definitely have lost my house. There's no way I could have kept it.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how, just like you said, people that travel with us or follow us on social media have become like family, and they take care of us. And
Absolutely.
it's been really amazing to watch how people care, and they want to make sure, because we are suffering. And the thing I was thinking about the other day, I can't even get another job if I wanted to, because there's nothing in my industry available.
I mean, I was reading about Qantas pilots who were driving buses. As I say,
what do we do?
Our
entire industry. It's not like we can get a comparable job.
Exactly. And the thing is that you have a situation where you're doing something where, as Reed and I were saying earlier, where not only are people having a good time, you're educating them.
Yeah.
You're giving them another perspective that they take home. You get emails coming back saying, the time I spent with you has given me a whole new perspective on whether it be wildlife or your history or your culture. That's been ripped out of us. We feel like we have no actual use. So I've been lucky enough to get some little side jobs in the movie industry, driving people around, working on sets, because not so many movies are being made, but a lot of adverts are now starting to be made as well, with the whole COVID era moving by. We obviously all masked and things like that. In fact, I worked on a production not so long ago, which was an American product, but it was all done via live feed and Zoom. So the production house didn't even have to come here. That's how it works nowadays. You can do everything through the internet. So, and it has made people appreciate dialogue again, and talking and having conversation and having company. And I think people are really champing at the bit to get out and travel. So that's when it does come back, I think we're going to be overwhelmed.
I think so too. I think 2022 is looking really good so far. So if you have free time, I got to get you hooked up with my new organization, the Guide Collective. It's just a bunch of tour guides, and we're writing and producing videos. And above all, it's not necessarily money that we're after. It's that we're after feeling useful, just like you said.
Sure.
It's hard to feel like you can't do the thing you love.
Absolutely.
So I got to get you connected with that. Well, my friend, we've gone way over time, but it's just, we've got so many cool things to say and so many experiences. So it's been really a delight to talk to you today. Tomorrow, what time are we cooking at?
I believe South African time, 5 o'clock. So I think your time minus 9 hours from that.
I'm doing math.
Okay, so you're talking about 10 o'clock your time in the morning.
Okay, same time, exact same time.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'll be ready.
No, we can do it at the same time. Is that what you're going to schedule? Because that works for me.
10 o'clock. Let's just keep it the same time. So the same time that we did today, let's do that tomorrow.
Perfect.
That's easy.
Perfect.
10 o'clock
Happy with that.
Time. We'll do cooking tomorrow. So that's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to teach me how to cook, which will be.
I'm going to show you how to cook babuti while drinking red wine.
Okay, I'm good with drinking red wine at 10 o'clock. We're still under quarantine. Why not? Everything's okay right now.
Awesome.
In my pajamas, I'll make cook with you drinking red wine in my pajamas. That sounds perfect.
Fantastic. Okay.
All right. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all of the people in the audience for watching today. And again, like Todd said, that just really, reminded me, thank you from the bottom of my heart to everybody who supports me, especially on Patreon. And if you're not a Patreon supporter, go to patreon.com/adventures with Sarah, and you can become a donor, which is so awesome because it keeps me and my children fed. So thank you. So we'll see you again on Wednesday. Thanks so much, Todd.
Awesome. See you tomorrow.